Stafford Afternoons is another of those poems from the Meantime collection, like Litany and Captain of the 1964 Top of the Form Team, that explore that border between childhood and adulthood, moments where the darkness of experience kind of encroaches on the light of innocence. Although we know from from her own biography that Duffy, having been born in Glasgow, did move down to Stafford, and we can assume an autobiographical basis for the poem. Obviously, we've got to avoid simply reading it as autobiography, and we do have to kind of see the I speaking in this poem as a construction, a persona of Caroline Duffy's. Stanza 1 of the poem begins by placing us in a specific time and place. Only there, the poem begins. The foregrounded adverbial rooting us in a specific time and moment to kind of indicate to us that this was a real moment, a real experience. The poem is built initially on kind of banal, everyday details. Stafford itself, no offence to any residents of Stafford who might be watching, a pretty banal place in itself. It's hardly a place that conjures, great emotion and passion. But there is, the lacing of shoes, the empty gardens, the chiming of the ice cream van, a noise that dwindled away, and there in that sound perhaps already a metaphorical reference to the fading of childhood as the inevitable drift towards adulthood. From under the surface of this banal, everyday, average experience, though, tears something altogether darker, more troubling and more significant. In second stanza, the speaker wanders in that sort of the way that is the privilege of childhood, that aimless drifting and wandering, finds herself, waving at windscreens from a motorway bridge. Again, the caesure at the end of the sixth line emphasises the speed. It's another way in which the poem reminds us that the security, the idyllic world of childhood is surrounded by dangers and threats, as if it's close to being violated. There's a kind of we look back on a more innocent time when children were just allowed to wander by motorway bridges without the fear that constantly perhaps surrounds them in the present age. A reference there from Duffy. Threat and distance does indeed surround this child. A strange boy throws a stone. Prior to that, to having drifted towards the adulthood, she finds herself pulling back by inventing a vivid lie with the horse in the field. There is a paradox running throughout this poem of something strange and alien, a world that is familiar to her and yet is so unknown. It's captured when the speaker feels both lonely and thrilled when they find themselves at the edge of a small wood. And here, again, metaphorically, is the frontier between childhood and adulthood. A frontier that Duffy will spectacularly crash through. And the wood becomes personified, like something from a fairy tale. The green silence gulped once and swallowed me whole. Again, childhood, vivid fantasy giving into the darkness of the adult world. And swallowed by the forest, danger looms, personified via sly faces and sticky breath, while flowering nettles gathered spit in their throats. The speaker engages the senses here to transmit the physical, palpable sense of danger that's inherent in this space. A sinister danger that the speaker acknowledges and yet is not fazed by, not deterred by. She moves on towards this danger. Stanza 5 begins with another adverbial. Too late. The danger has been, she's gone too close to the danger now for any kind of comfort. And then, of course, she is confronted by the sight of this long-haired man flashing his what should we call it? Adulthood. We'll use the phrase that Duffy herself metaphorically uses, a living purple root. Gorgeous there. A phrase to be filed alongside Larkin's tuberous cock and balls, perhaps, in the in our chart of favourite phallic phrases from the two collections of poems that we're dealing with. Back then, of course, this ordeal that Duffy, or the speaker, I should say, endures. It's quite a common experience in childhood back then. I think these days, it's just reserved via Instagram and Snapchat. Back then, though, people had to go to the fuss of doing this kind of thing in person. I know, strange days. It's having seen this sound rushes back. The sort of the post-traumatic stress, if you like, of being confronted by this long-haired man and his urgent, his hoarse encouragement to touch. She rushes back to the streets, the safety, if you like, of childhood, but it is both the same and somehow is being transformed. The children are screaming, shrieking rather, with childhood fun, but in that verb shrieked, we've got to find implied something again darker and more scary, basically. And the final simile of the poem captures this sense of transformation. Time fell from the sky like a red ball. It is at once, an image of play, an image of fun and freedom, the liberty of childhood, but that red ball falling implies something more dangerous, something heavier, something darker, and again, Duffy has kind of captured here the ambiguity, a real ambiguity at the end of this poem, that something has been lost within this poem. In terms of the form, Duffy presents the poem through 6 stanzas of 4 lines each, quatrains to you and me, without a fixed metre or rhyme. However, as is a wont really, unlike Larkin, she very rarely sticks to precise metrical schemes and rhyme schemes in the way that Larkin, very adheres to, very strictly in many of his poems, of course. In terms of other connections to Larkin, we can see this as a poem where the everyday gives rise to something stranger and perhaps more significant. This is a process that Larkin undergoes in poems like as diverse as Bleeny and Dockery and Son, where an awful meat pie early in the poem can give rise to something of an epiphany later in the towards the end of the poem. This is a structural thing that Larkin uses a lot, as we've talked about, and here Duffy perhaps the same thing from fairly humble beginnings, something more significant occurs. In terms of context, we can see this as a reflection on childhood, the difference in childhood back in the late 60s, when Duffy herself was a resident in Stafford, and we could also perhaps see this just in terms of references to time. This is another poem, of course, in a collection called Meantime, that does investigate the movement of time, the inexorable pull towards adulthood and the dangers and darkness that brings, and the way that imprints itself on the consciousness and on the mind, and forges the character of the adult that will emerge from the child. So that was Stafford Afternoons. I'll see you again soon.